Over the past few years, as newer mascot horror games have released over time, I think people have come to criticize the redundancy of specific aspects of it, the lore being similar, concepts. There's a lot that has already been done at some point, and it's very hard to make a game stand out when mascot horror has a very copy and paste sort of formatting nowadays. But one of the things that I feel is severely lacking in a lot of these newer mascot horror games is background and setting design. While I do think that there are a lot of really good mascot horror games coming out nowadays, there's that quality and style individualism that I think is missing. And I just want to bring up some examples of this, and also, I guess, reminisce on some of the older games that I really loved growing up, and why I think each of their style really works in setting them apart. So the first example I want to pull up is Bendy and the Ink Machine. There's no way that Bendy and the Ink Machine was not going to be making this list. One thing that you'll come to learn about me when it comes to mascot horror is I overglaze the hell out of Bendy and the Ink Machine. Bendy and the Ink Machine is one of the greatest examples, I think, of finding a style for your game and really emphasizing it, as besides the memorable aspects of the game, story-wise, I think it's able to differentiate itself from the dead children archetype of mascot horror by a long shot. Traversing through the settings of Bendy and the Ink Machine, while it is very similar gameplay-wise to a lot of what comes out in newer mascot horror now, the style of the game itself is so vastly different. I think it really helps that it has such monochromatic color palettes, the emphasis on warm lighting. I feel like there's a lot of mascot horror that's kind of leaned into more factory LED looking lighting. I think that it can work for some settings, like making it feel cold and unwelcoming, but warm lighting, especially the warmth in Bendy and the Ink Machine itself, makes it such a standout to me. While Bendy and the Ink Machine does take place in a studio, a company, something adjacent to that, and that's something that still exists in mascot horror, it's a huge part of it. Bendy and the Ink Machine's design never felt like it was intending to go in a direction that other games had gone in. I think I could just go on forever looking at all of the background details and appreciate every little bit of it because it is awesome. When you're talking about different mascot horror games, not only is Bendy a very recognizable mascot, but I think just from the game design standpoint is very, very memorable. One of the things that you're focusing on the most in mascot horror is traversing an area. Most of the games under this category do involve moving around and interacting with your environment, and I think that's such an important aspect of your game. There has to be something that differentiates it from other franchises. Bendy is just the greatest example of this I can think of, like off of the top of my head. Another mascot horror game that I think really pushes the personality of its game itself is Baldi's Basics. This is something that I think I'll bring up a lot more later, is it's not necessarily that the quality changes or depreciates the value in a mascot horror game. I think a lot of really low quality games still have a sense of self and artistic vision. Baldi's Basics really knows how to work with that lower quality and make it very interesting. Obviously, Baldi's Basics is supposed to be parodying math and educational games, and obviously they were low quality, right? So that aspect is very intentional in the game design. But I also think it works in standing out from other mascot horror games, as a lot of them have leaned into more factories, more franchises, like exploring abandoned places, right? Baldi's Basics is very different in that aspect because you are kind of pushed into the setting itself of the game, and it's very aware of its game-like feature. It's supposed to be you in the game. I think visually, mascot horror has only significantly improved when it comes to lighting and model quality and things like that. But Baldi's Basics is able to still retain its personal style to a degree that I feel a lot of newer mascot horror falls flat on. And in fact, I think this lower quality aspect of this game in particular makes it stand out more. It also helps that the story is very vastly different from your typical mascot horror cookie cutter storytelling, so that's also very nice. This is a more weak example. I think it's more on par with Baldi in terms of style when it comes to low quality, but Granny has always been very recognizable to me. The textures in the game itself are very PNG-like, but also heavily textured. One of the things I've noticed a lot with texture work in newer mascot horror games is everything feels very polished or smooth. It doesn't really lean into the edginess that I think is very present in a lot of early Mascot horror and just early horror games in general. I think they were trying to be overly gritty at the time. While I do think the quality of the game has aged as time goes on and as, technologies improve and indie developers are able to access said technologies a lot easier, Granny still feels very standout to me. Not just the quality that makes it very recognizable, but also the texture of the game and the general environment. Going back to the factory thing being a very prevalent part of Mascot horror, Granny takes place in a very small location. I wouldn't even say small, it just feels that way because it's a house. It feels like it's decaying. I just think that's really neat, even as the game itself becomes a little bit more dated in the line of Mascot horror. I think that there are a lot of gritty topics and darker topics that do take place in Mascot horror, and I don't think that there's any lack of blood or spookier aspects of the game, but they don't really do it the way that Granny does it. Does that make sense? I really can't describe it in any particular words I can think of at the moment. And I think this one is probably one of the more controversial parts of this list. I include this game in Mascot horror because even though Mascot horror is in the name, a lot of the earlier Mascot horror games I don't think really lean into the horror aspect of it, but more the mascot part of it. With that in mind, Hello Neighbor has a lot of problems with its game. Storytelling-wise, direction-wise, lore-wise, it leaves a lot to be desired, but one of the things that I can particularly appreciate about this game is the design levels. Okay, do I think that it needs a lot of work? Yeah. Do I think it's very buggy? Yeah. But there's something that I think Hello Neighbor does that a lot of newer horror doesn't, and that's lean into the more ridiculous aspects of Mascot horror. While it does have horror in the name, as I've mentioned before, at its core, Mascot horror has always appealed to a younger demographic, and I think Hello Neighbor is the best example of it. I really love the lighting in particular when it comes to the first 2 chapters of Hello Neighbor, as one of the huge points of Mascot horror as a genre is to twist what feels familiar into something that isn't, right? And for what it's worth, Hello Neighbor works very well in that regard. The neighborhood feels very stylistic in a way that reminds me a lot of early cartoons. Obviously, the neighbor himself looks very similar to Buzz Lightyear. I think I've seen people mention that a lot over the years. But even just the design of the house, it's very exaggerated and colorful in a way that it makes sense for a child to see things. I think the exaggeration in Hello Neighbor really works in that way, and even as newer Mascot horror games come out, there's that level of cartoonish style that I think Hello Neighbor is still able to exude even years later. Again, I do wish that more newer Mascot horror games kind of leaned into that ridiculous aspect of Mascot horror, because it is, to some extent, very silly when you think about the lore, when you think about the mascots themselves. While Hello Neighbor is definitely not the greatest Mascot horror game, I think it's a very memorable Mascot horror franchise. Moving on to the last example, I feel like FNAF has come very far from its original gameplay, from its original storytelling, characters, because a lot of that was very limited. That shows the most when you're looking at some of the earlier games and their game design. Other Mascot horror at the time was focusing on exploration, the antagonist of the game finding you in the sense that you're wandering around halls. The earlier FNAF games really focused on being in one setting and only that setting, so it's very constrained in that sense. But there's also, again, that level to cartoonishness in each of the backgrounds that make some of the earlier games very stand out to me. While they do have very technically realistic elements in them when it comes to lighting and the designs of the desks and everything, there's still that personal style that kind of seeps through, and that just might be my own bias. Even looking at the first 3 FNAF games, even though there were huge differences and improvements in the gameplay over time, the style remained consistent throughout all 3 of those, I would say. Besides the mascots being there, the table is one of the most recognizable pieces of Mascot horror design that I can think of off of the top of my head because of how unique it is, I guess. But those are just some of my own examples and commentary on Mascot horror and the current state of background design. I do think that there are some really great Mascot horror games coming out. Again, this isn't to discredit any of those, but there is something to be said about the redundancy and the repetition of concepts that kind of goes on in Mascot Horror. There are a bunch of different things that I think earlier Mascot Horror was able to do to differentiate itself and keep it unique, even when these Mascot Horror games are coming out all at the same time. I don't think that you need to be entirely gritty and realistic, have great quality in the design for it to be memorable. Again, a lot of these games had very limited resources or used very limited palettes, lighting, colors, but they're still able to stand out when put next to each other, which I feel a lot of newer Mascot Horror really isn't able to do. And I don't know, that's just something that I particularly miss, but I would love to hear your thoughts on this if there's any games, new or old, that you think exude personal style in the same way that I'm trying to describe here. And of course, if your ideas or thoughts contradict mine, I would also really love to hear that. And as always, my comment section is open for discussion on topic or not. And yeah, that's all. Bye!